Welcome to another episode of Art Heals All Wounds. I'm your host, Pam Uzel. On this show, we meet artists transforming lives with their work. I have a question. Do you like moving? Sorting through all the things that you've accumulated over time, deciding, do I take this? Do I give it away? Do I throw it away? One thing I do when I try to move is that I start to reminisce over each object, remembering when and where I got it, what the circumstances were, who I was with, and the person that I was at that time, the entire story around that object. In the past few years, we've learned from the tidy guru Marie Kondo that we're supposed to get rid of everything that doesn't spark joy for us. When poet Maw Shein Win found herself with the dreadful task of moving, she had some objects that definitely didn't spark joy for her. She wondered why, then, she had such a hard time letting them go. Rather than throwing everything out, she did something much better. She wrote a volume of poetry called Storage Unit for the Spirit House. In these poems, she contemplates the notion of containers of all kinds that store things, whether it's a storage unit that holds our objects or the objects themselves that hold our memories. You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. Listen and let us inspire you. I crawl into the pod formerly known as Storage Unit 202. Inside is a quilt made of yesterday's tablecloth, today's plaid coat, and tomorrow's prayer shawls. The storage unit emits a humming sound. Occasionally, a high-pitched note bounces off the metallic walls. I cook peas in the pod. I drink moonshine at dawn. Observations. One might sense a breath over a face. One may envision the tourists trampling the wildflower superbloom. One can sleep alone with a space heater. That poem is called Storage Unit 202. It's from the latest volume of poetry by Maw Shein Win called Storage Unit for the Spirit House, published in 2020 and longlisted for the 2021 PEN America Open Book Award. San Francisco Magazine included Maw as one of 100 artists putting the East Bay on the map. Reading Win's work is something like closing your eyes and letting all of your favorite images from dreams and movies play behind your eyelids. Ma was a very active reader in the virtual space of the pandemic, and she's just now started getting back to live readings and events. I'm really happy to have her join us here to talk about her new collection of poems and what's coming up next for her. Hi, Ma. Thank you so much for being on today's episode.
Hi, Pam. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Before we get started in talking about your latest book and your other work, I was just hoping that you would introduce yourself. Tell us what you do.
All right. My name is Maw Shein Win, and I'm a poet. I have a book that came out last fall called Storage Unit for the Spirit House on Omnidon. And my previous full-length collection is called Invisible Gifts on Manic Depress, and that came out in 2018. And I collaborate with musicians and visual artists. And yeah, that's what I do. I live in El Cerrito and happy to be here.
Speaking of El Cerrito, you were the first ever El Cerrito Poet Laureate. How did that come about?
I have a couple friends who live in El Cerrito, and they were encouraging me to apply. And I guess I felt, I wouldn't get chosen, just like having that typical, writer self-doubt or whatever. And one of my friends came by and he dropped the application off on our front step, as well as a little button that said El Cerrito Poet. And it was 2 days before the application was due. And I just said, Ma, come on. Just throw your hat in the ring. So I applied, and remarkably, I was chosen.
That's wonderful. I mean, I didn't even really know that cities picked a poet laureate, but I'm so happy that El Cerrito started that and that they picked
Oh,
you.
thank you. It was a great experience.
Yeah. When did you start writing poetry? And also, why did you start writing poetry?
I started writing at a very early age, I think like fourth or fifth grade. And I had an encouraging teacher in fifth grade, particularly, who noticed that I was always writing in my little blue book. And I mean, I don't know if they were poems, but she just was very encouraging. And I remember on the last day of class, she said that she wrote a little, she must have been a poet herself because she wrote a little poem, and I don't remember it because it was so long ago, but it was something about being a poet, and it just had such a influence on me as a young person. And then, in junior high, like every other kid, I was keeping a journal,
Mm.
and throughout high school, and I was writing for the school papers. And in that period, I was just writing poems and just continued until I went to school, college.
I think a lot of people possibly doubt whether or not they could be creative until they meet someone who, like a mentor, a teacher, or someone who says, you can do this, or you should do this, or you're good at
Yeah.
this.
I feel fortunate that I also had an instructor as an undergraduate who his name was Dr. Lee, and he was so incredibly encouraging, and I was writing like really surreal poems that I think hopefully a couple students appreciated it, but I think that he, just like really wanted to kind of hold me in that safe space, to feel free to write in different styles and about different subject matter. And
And where did you go to undergraduate school?
Cal State Long Beach and in their creative writing department.
Did you?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
nice. Very nice.
I didn't go to graduate school. I actually started teaching after I finished school. And for a while, I thought I might want to be a librarian. And I moved to Los Angeles and worked in different libraries. And I guess I just realized that, I like teaching. So I ended up teaching and got a teaching credential.
I've been reading reviews of your work and interviews with you, and I read that you moved a lot as a child. I'm wondering what that was like for you and if any of that is expressed in your poetry.
Yes, we moved a lot. Both of my parents were young doctors, immigrants from Burma. They immigrated from Burma in the early 60s. And my father, after they both finished their residencies, my dad in particular, had offers to work in these different hospitals. And so I was born back east, Massachusetts, and we just basically moved across the United States to New York City, and then to Allentown, Pennsylvania, Grand Junction, Colorado, Sparks, Nevada, Southern California, and it was a lot of moving. And I mean, I haven't written in like a truly autobiographical sense about moving, but I think that having moved a lot as a young child, as a young person, affected my writing in the sense that I write about place and different
Mm.
locations and movement. So I think that has informed my having moved a lot, my family having moved a lot has informed my writing for sure.
Well, one reason I ask about your childhood, I want to segue into talking about your latest book, Storage Unit for the Spirit House. That's such an amazing combination of locations or types of places, a storage unit and a spirit house. And storage units do often bring up this idea of moving. What's the story behind the title of this book?
Title went through many iterations, by the way, but that was the one I landed on with a vote from friends. But I went through a divorce, and I was lucky to, a year later, have met a wonderful, wonderful human being, and we had to move. Speaking of moving,
Right.
and I had lived in the house for 15 years. Needless to say, there was a lot in the house. I am a collector of objects, for sure. And it was really a huge ordeal just packing and moving and getting rid of stuff, and also not really having a place that a plan as far as like where were we going to live, because as we know, the Bay Area is so expensive. And
Yes.
so, I mean, I knew I wanted to get rid of stuff anyways. And so I was very fortunate that I had a lot of friends that came over every weekend and just throwing out stuff. And one of my friends, Heather, she noticed that I had mail from the 80s. But Tom, my husband now, we hung on to art and we hung on to books and records. Tom's a musician, and I'm really into music as well. And just, I mean, ephemera, of course, but pretty much got rid of all our furniture, but we still had 2 storage units. So there was a lot of like, I don't know. I mean, I guess talk about our storage units, thinking about the storage unit, like moving to the storage units and finding a storage unit, et cetera, et cetera. And it was actually something I'd never even really thought about before. So I became a little interested in storage units and started researching storage units. And of course, when I was driving around, noticing storage units, everywhere I looked, and it's, oh, but look at that storage unit. I wonder how much that storage unit is. And then reading stories about storage units. And I actually watched Storage Wars, that reality TV show. And I was like, oh, God. That was kind of made me sad.
I've never heard of that show.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's about people who have storage units and they can't afford to pay for them anymore. And so people come and bid on them. And it's really, I only watched, I think, 2 episodes. It was too much for me. So I stopped watching it. I don't know. I just started writing poems about storage units. And that's how the book, the manuscript, began. And it just kind of led me to thinking about other forms of, architecture and containers.
Right.
And so, I started writing about malls and vases and prison cells and so on.
Yeah. Well, what about this idea of the spirit house, though? How did that end up as the second half of this title?
That's a good question. I am Burmese and I was raised Buddhist. A lot of my family, I have many family members still in Burma, Myanmar. And when I was working on this collection, I felt like there was something that was just missing from the work together, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And then I started thinking about the spirit houses in Burma as well as in neighboring countries in Southeast Asia. And then started reading spirit houses and the Nat spirits, spelled N-A-T. And that was utterly fascinating to just go take a dive into that world. That was kind of, for me, I don't know, how do I say this? Like a way for me to complete the book. And I wrote these spirit house poems. There's 6 sections in the book. And so a spirit house poem either opens or closes each section.
Yes, I loved that. Can you go back and talk about Nat spirits? Because
Sure.
I had never heard of that before I picked up your book. And it's kind of a fascinating concept that I don't think I've really wrapped my head around yet.
So basically, a Nat is an animist deity. And there are, I mean, not all Buddhists, but there are Buddhists in Southeast Asia who believe in the Nat spirit stories, and they're basically venerated. I guess a way to talk about them is that they exist in like kind of almost like a liminal zone, although that's not what it says in the in the text, but in between world. There is a really rich collection of all these stories that each Nat spirit has. And, I'm still to this day continuing to read about these stories. And many of the stories are on the dark side. The spirits have maybe, when they were previously beings, died from maybe violent deaths or,
Mm.
just in tragic ways. But not all the spirits. Like some of the spirits are more playful than there are tree spirits. And it's just, I mean, I am certainly, there's so much more for me to learn. It's really, I mean, there are just people who primarily focus on just studying this belief system.
That's
It's
fascinating.
really fascinating.
Well, I remember one of the first poems in your book, and I may misquote the line, but is it "The gnats have stolen my hair"?
Yes, that's the first poem in the book.
I do just have to follow up. What were you thinking when you wrote that line? Because so many visions pop into my head when I hear that line. Literal stealing of hair, comparing it to birds who take pieces of hair, or people who collect pieces of hair for various rituals, keepsakes, things like that. So I'm so curious, what were you thinking, if you can say, when you wrote that line?
I mean, I think I was originally thinking about literally, literally like hair, my hair, or the character in the poem's hair falling. Like, I mean, my hair actually does fall out all the time. So it's like I see it all over the floor. Well, I thought about our family home on Inya Lake and just thinking about hair falling to the ground and floating away. And then when I started thinking about the gnat spirits, maybe the more playful ones, that's interesting. You brought up birds, like, oh, that, maybe these, a gnat spirit would come down and collect the hair at night,
Yeah.
the strands of hair at night. And so that, I wrote that poem a while ago, but I think that was what was in my mind when I was writing that poem in particular.
And where is Inya Lake?
In Yangon, in Burma.
And that's an extended family
Yes.
home?
Yeah.
Can you talk about more themes in Storage Unit for the Spirit House? I definitely know that I felt there were some themes. I felt there was a lot about loss and sort of the chaos of childhood and family dynamics. But I also know that I could be projecting things onto your poems, which poetry invites us to do quite a bit. But I'm just wondering, as you were writing this, what themes came up for you?
Well, to go back to the gnat spirits, I started thinking about, for the spirit houses, you want to appease the gnat spirits in these little spirit houses that are outside of people's homes, often on little stilts. And so people will put offerings to the gnat spirits, like rice or water or flowers or coconut. And when I started writing, I guess I considered or imagined what would it be like if the gnat spirits entered my family home, or not just my family, but anyone's homes, and what would ensue. So that was something that I thought about, and thinking about the theme, you are right, themes of loss and themes of trauma, and the thinking about how the gnat spirits could wreak havoc in one's life. And then I think that sometimes we are attracted to the spirit world, spirituality and religion, for those stories that kind of will make sense to why things happen to people. And so I'm kind of fascinated with that.
Right.
So that was definitely something, for me, that came up in writing the Spirit House poems, as well as other poems. And as well as, as I mentioned earlier, thinking about containment. And, I wrote this book pre-pandemic, actually. So it was just when everything happened, it was like, wow, how weird. Like now, like I've been writing about containment for a year plus, and thinking about being in enclosures and rooms. So it was just so strange to all of a sudden be in that world. And I guess when I started thinking about spaces, after writing these storage unit poems and thinking about, like, what do we hold on to? Why do we hold on to the things we hold on to? And what do we let go of? And what do we forget? And what do we want to remember? And then I kind of went outside of the box, so to speak, and I started thinking about nature as containers. And it's kind of ironic in a way, like the sky space poems, because actually
Yeah.
sky is an open space.
Right.
But I guess I started thinking about it like, well, what if sky served as a sort of container in a
Right.
way? It's a holder and of sky space as well as water.
Right.
So that's how the sky space and water space pieces happened. And then, of course, I mean, we're surrounded by containers, not only physical, but also emotional. Like the body is a container. Our minds are containers. Our heart is a container of sorts, right?
Right.
And so actually it was, a theme that really just kind of opened up for me, even though I'm talking about sometimes a closing in, but it also was expansive in as far as inspirations for my writing.
Oh, yeah. And what incredible timing of the writing about that. And then essentially all of us spending over a year
Yeah,
pretty much only in our homes.
right. Yeah.
And when I think of some of your poems, that becomes even more meaningful. I mean, I'm still can't let go of this combination of storage unit and spirit house, because what I wonder is, whose storage unit is it? Is it the gnats, or is it the people making offering to the gnats? And maybe in the storage unit, there are things that they wouldn't offer, but they also can't let go of. I don't know. Perhaps I'm really thinking about this too hard, but I find it a really, really evocative idea.
Well, I love that you thought of that, Pam. Because I was wondering, how would it be if the gnats entered the storage units?
Mm.
So I've kind of been exploring that a little bit this past year, during our shelter in place. And I feel like that could just be a whole other thread of writing that I could continue. I guess in a way, I think about objects being more than just the object itself, because objects or containers can be containers of memory, and
Yes.
like, why do we hang on to this one silver spoon for 25 years, or the one single sock or a broken bell or, whatever. Yeah, just off the top of my head. But I think that sometimes, in a way, this is a little out there, but, like kind of an object can have a spirit, right? Like, I mean, you think about trees having a spirit and water and sky and things in nature. It's a way of thinking about objects as well, that
Mm.
there's a spirit and certainly stories that are behind and surrounding the object.
Well, we definitely do create relationships with our objects, which is what you're talking about, that why we can't let go of some of them. I know for me, it's often a fear that I might forget whatever it is that object is signifying
Yeah.
if I let go of the object.
I remember when we were leaving Berkeley, I had this sofa, and it wasn't even that great of a sofa. It was just this like little green sofa that I'd had for like a million years. And of course, like, we weren't going to put it in the storage unit, and so friends were like, well, I'll take your sofa, or, or no, I know someone who might want your sofa. And I remember that I had this really bizarre, odd attachment to that darn sofa. Like I did, and I was trying to figure out like what was it about that sofa? And then, I realized like, oh, the sofa was the first piece of furniture we had bought, my previous in my previous relationship. And I think it just represented like a beginning, but also an ending.
Mm.
And when I finally gave that sofa away, I was just like, it was such a release. I just was like, and then I was questioning myself, like, what took me so long to get rid of that sofa? So it was kind of, I mean, I kind of laughed about it later, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, the symbolism of that is very powerful.
Yeah.
We've all had our own versions of that little green sofa.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is such, I feel like it's a great thing that you gave it away. I'm really happy
Oh,
to
it was
hear
great.
that.
Oh my gosh. And actually, to tell you the truth, getting rid of pretty much, I don't know, I'd say like 85% of my stuff,
Yeah.
our stuff was such a release,
Yeah.
like the gnats flying out of the trunk. It just felt like, oh, why did I hold on to these things for so long? And
Yeah.
it was great to get rid of objects. I mean, now that we are living in our home, I have collected a few more objects, but
Yeah.
but not as many.
Yes. Yes. I totally get it. I get it. Well, I am wondering if you could read a poem. And I sent you an email about what my favorite one was, but you can read a different one if you want to. But I really loved Spirit House
I
5.
would love to read that poem.
Oh, thank
Thank
you.
you, Pam. This is Spirit House 5, and it was published in the Cortland Review. Spirit House 5. As a child, I did not climb trees. Instead, I gathered leaves that flew to the ground. The elms were tall in the fall, the neighbor boys cruel. One left a dead kitten in a box on the doorstep. I made homes among the leaves, safety in gold, yellow, brown. Invented a family who lived in a treehouse. Green twig, the mother, broken branch, the father, two ferns, the missing sisters.
I just love that poem. I love the poem.
Thank
And
you.
I love especially the choices for the family. Do you have anything that you would want to say about those choices for the family, or is it just what came to you as you were writing?
I think when I was writing this piece, as far as place and location, I was remembering living in Grand Junction,
Mm.
Colorado,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember, making these homes of the leaves and okay, poetic mind remembers making a little family out of branches, but I'm not sure if that really happened. But I do remember making homes from the leaves and
Yeah. It's really beautiful. And the other thing that I realized too, because I was able to catch you doing a reading last week, is that poems are a great thing to read yourself. But for me, poetry is something that is meant to be listened to. And so I'm really appreciative of the fact that you do lots of readings and that you're out there giving your own voice and cadence to these beautiful words.
oh, thank you. I do a lot of readings. I have done a lot of readings, and I feel fortunate in the fact that being a writer, especially during this time. I mean, at least we have the remote world, the virtual world, Zoom, to continue to do readings.
Right.
And I feel like that's really been for so many writers a saving grace.
Yeah.
Because my husband Tom is a musician, and I know it's much more difficult for musicians during,
Yes.
as you probably, for musicians, it's really hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
It is. Well, Ma, what's coming up next for you?
I have a reading coming up with Kenneth Wong, and it's for Alta Mesa, which is a new reading series run by Mary Volmer and Alyssa Johnson, both amazing writers. And the focus of the event is going to be about Burma.
Mm.
And so we will be not only reading our own work, Kenneth is from Burma, we'll also be reading the work of Burmese poets
Mm.
and talking about the situation there. So, yeah, so I think that's my next big thing coming up.
When is that happening?
August 8th.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
at 4
Great.
p.m.
Well, if people want to learn more about your work and the other
Mhm.
things that you do, how can they find that
A
out?
website. It's Maw Shein Win, MawSheinWin.com. And there's info there about me and and a couple really cool videos by Adrian de la Peña. He made some videos based on poems in my collection.
Oh,
And he
nice.
also did the wonderful art for the cover.
Okay.
And I also want to just mention, you probably noticed all the illustrations.
Yes, I did.
Illustrations are by my other best friend, Mark Dutcher, who's an artist in California. So it just feels very moving to me that the three of us are together in the spirit house and storage unit of my book.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for being on this episode, Ma. It was so great to learn more about you.
Thank you, Pam. It was lovely to be here and talk to you today.
You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. Remember to be in touch on my Facebook page, Art Heals All Wounds, and also on Twitter and Instagram at Art Heals Podcast. I'm so grateful to Maw Shein Win for being a guest on this episode of Art Heals All Wounds, and it was a special treat to hear her read one of her poems. If you want to learn more about Ma and her work, you can find her at www.mawsheinwin.com. That's MawSheinWin.com. Also, keep an eye out for the Alta Mesa reading series and Benefit for Mutual Aid Myanmar. Ma and Kenneth Wong will be reading their work, as well as work by other Burmese poets. This is a virtual event on August 8th. You can find out more about it at www.maryvolmer.com. That's MARYVOLMER.com. The music you've heard in this podcast is Yellow Light District and Autowaschenlage Instrumental by Lobo Loco. Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 15 in D major was performed by Karina Galanian. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you liked it, please subscribe to the podcast. Be sure to drop me a line on Instagram or Facebook, letting me know what you're enjoying and what you'd like to hear more of.